Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Uh, Welcome to our webinar today. I can see a bunch of people flooding in. Just going to wait a little bit to sort of let people come in here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So great to be here. Okay, so look, while we're waiting for people to arrive today, please feel free to jump into the chat and make sure you send it to everybody and just let us know where you're dialing in from. And then also, if you feel like it, so I'm from Sydney, Australia, and we've got Kyle here as well. If you feel like it, also feel free to share. Hello, Canada. If you feel free to share just why you're coming here today. If there's something on your mind you want to get out of this, feel free to share that as well, and we might see if we can loop back. Oh, a few from Chicago, very nice. Boston, Brisbane, wow, good gang.
Oh,
Sunny Salt Lake.
we've got some Aussies, some Kiwis, and some Americans here. And Americans like me are celebrating Valentine's Day today, but those across the international date line have already done that. So
We have. Yes, I'm not in my pink shirt today, very foolishly. I should have been more romantic. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Hope you got something fun planned. We had a wonderful Valentine's Day here in Australia, but alas, it is the 15th, the Ides of February. Okay, so I think we've got most people in here. Welcome, friends. It's great to have you. Okay. So let's get this rolling. So hello everybody. I'm Mark. I am the CEO and co-founder of Qwilr. We are like a sales tool. I spend a whole bunch of my time thinking about sales, talking to sales leaders, trying to figure out what's going on in this world. One of my favorite people to talk sales about is the gentleman on the call today, Kyle. Kyle is the GM and VP of Revenue at Mixmax. Kyle, do you want to give a quick background on yourself?
yeah, you bet. Like Mark, I spend all day, every day talking about sales, and I absolutely love it. And I've been in sales my whole career. I've been an individual contributor and a sales leader, and this is one of the topic that we've chosen today. I wouldn't be surprised if 10,000 people show up to this webinar because this is one of the stickiest, hardest things to do. And I absolutely love talking about this stuff. So I'm excited to get into it. Mark and I have done a few of these together. They're always a ton of fun, as you can tell from his intro. He's just a bundle of fun and a wealth of knowledge in the sales space too. So this should be good.
It's Valentine's vibe going on here. So much love. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping today. Look, Kyle and I are very, like, we've done this a bunch of times. We're very calm, casual. We're here to try to have a real conversation. Gosh, that sounds cliched. But we are here to try to have an authentic, useful conversation. There's no point in doing these if you guys don't get value out of it. As we go through, like, feel free to use the chat, use the Q&A. We're gonna have a Q&A session at the end. Generally, Kyle and I tend to like run a bit long, as in like stretch out that Q&A section and even go a bit longer than planned if needed. So like we'll try to get to everything that we can. If you have questions as we go, or you want to poke and prod on something, feel free to ask. And if we can, we'll get to it as we go. There's gonna be a couple of polls as we go, things like that. But otherwise, we'll sort of try to keep it relevant and short and sharp and tight. Okay, so let's set the table. It's been like a tough period of time for a lot of sellers. Not everybody. I know some people are out there having a wonderful time, but I think for the majority of folks, it has been a tough 12, even like maybe 15, 18 months. There's certainly at Qwilr, we've had a few tough quarters in 2023. Wonderful to close the books on 2023 and move on to the glorious land of 2024. And I do think that I think certainly Kyle and I had a chat about this recently. It does feel like in many parts of the sales space and in many sort of industries, the tide is sort of turning here. But like one of the biggest things that when times are tough, and even if the tide is turning, but when times are tough, every deal matters and can feel so valuable, especially whether you're a sales leader or a rep. You're just trying to make sure that every deal sort of does well. And one of the most frustrating things that can happen in sales is when you have a deal that is running along, going well, feeling the vibes, it's got some Valentine's love going to it, and then it sort of stalls out. And I think that this has happened to everybody in sales many, many times. And I think that there are sort of a bunch of sort of core common examples of how that happens and sort of what happens on that side. We're going to go through today and sort of talk about what you can do in these different scenarios that sort of try to break through on that side. So I think basic to sort of kick it off here. Well, actually, I don't know, Kyle, did you come with a war story? Has there been one? Has there been do you have a battle scar that you've got something ready to sort of to share on this side? Something that was tough in the past year or so?
Not a specific instance, but to echo that, I think there is a very small minority of people who have been doing well over the last year and a half, and good for them. I'm happy for them, but most people have felt a lot of pain. Deal cycles getting much longer, many more people involved in the decision-making process. And so what we've done is we've chosen the most common reasons that a deal would stall, but we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions about different types of scenarios that may have happened to you. So we've come up with 5, and between Mark and I and the number of years that we have been doing this, I won't say how many between the two of us. It will age me very much, but these are the most common reasons that deals stall, but there are a myriad of other deals. And I'll put a qualification up front. I always like to do this. Our sales process is going to be different than everybody else's, slightly. There are some similarities, of course, and Mark and I both sell a SaaS product, and so there's a lot of similarities and a lot of overlap there. But you might sell a tangible product. You might sell, anything, and so your sales process may be a bit different. But there are reasons that deals stall, and they tend to be common across a lot of deal cycles.
100%. Okay, let's kick it off with the poll. So we're going to sort of ask a little question here. So the wonderful Brendan is going to kick us off. So what is the most common reason? So you only get to pick one in this one. Why deals in your organization stall? So if you don't see something in here that resonates with you, feel free to say the something else part and throw it into the chat. And again, we'll see if we can loop back to sort of touch into that. But here are like some of the common things. A prospect disappears, pricing becomes an unexpected issue, like an invisible buyer, like someone behind the scenes who you're not dealing with face to face in the buying process, becomes a roadblock, or the purchase is deprioritized. So I don't know how we're going here, but everyone please vote and lock that in, and then we'll come around on that side. Question for you, Kyle. Which of these is the one that, like, is there any in here that sort of most, as a sales leader, most causes like a pit in your stomach to be like, oh, that's annoying?
Yeah, there's 2 of them that jump right out. And one of them is a sign of the times. It'd be the third one, that invisible buyer becomes a roadblock. What we have seen, and I think this is pretty common across everybody, is that the ultimate decision maker, the ultimate economic buyer, has now become the CFO, right? The decision has just flown all the way to the very top because budgets are so tight. And so that oftentimes is what's happening when you don't have direct access to the CFO. And look, the CFO almost never wants to get directly involved in a buying process, right? They want to be behind the scenes, they want to be literally invisible. But they're generally the economic buyer if you use medic or medpic terms. And then the second one is the purchase is deprioritized. This just happens, right? Your priorities are not your customers' priorities or your prospects' priorities. Their priorities change and things happen. And this, I have some really, I was about to say funny stories, but some of the ones have to do with natural disasters and things like that. So they're not funny, but they are stories where it just seems like the software purchase isn't a requirement of theirs anymore because they're dealing with other things.
All right, let's flip and see the results here. Okay, so we're
going to come out of the gates hot then.
We are going to get hot. So look, the good news is we're going to talk about all of these today and a little bit more on top of that. Thank you, David, for throwing that into the chat about like a current vendor comes back with better pricing service. We'll loop back around that, especially in the pricing section. But mate, let's kick it off. What do you do when a prospect disappears?
Yeah, this happens, and as evidenced by the poll, it's not uncommon, unfortunately. And so there's a couple of things that I will give you that are very tactical in nature that you can do. But the first thing that I'll say is strategic in nature, which is ghosting, as it's called, is a challenge. And so if you go into every sales cycle thinking that might be an issue, you start to do things in the discovery process, in the value justification process, to almost guarantee that you won't be ghosted. Like, ask, this sounds like a priority of yours. Are you sure that this is something that you want to see through to the very end? And are you committed to staying with me to the end of this process and not ghosting me, right? You need to build some rapport. You need to actually have shown some value before you start asking questions like that. That can't be the first question in your discovery process. But in all transparency, every deal cycle should feel like there is back and forth. It's not just all one-sided. And you should be giving, they should be getting, you should be getting, they should be giving, all these things. And so that's kind of the strategic part of this, is do things in your sales process to ensure that the person that you're talking to is vested in you and giving you answers and information, and they don't just ghost you. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You want to build a champion. You can tell that I've been trained in medic and medpic, because I'll use some of that terminology. Champion is definitely one of them. And if you don't know that qualification criteria of medpic, you should absolutely look into it. Champion is one of the most important parts of knowing that you've got a good deal. And if that person is your champion, there's going to be 3, 4, 5 other people behind the scenes, and we'll get to that on the invisible buyer part. But there's going to be other people involved in the evaluation and decision process. Get to know those people, right? Be multi-threaded. Don't be single-threaded. Even though you've got a champion and you've got this great relationship with them and you've built this great rapport, you're the fan of the same football team, you know, all these things that you might have in common, you feel really good about it. If you're only talking to one person, that's a giant risk. And so be multi-threaded. That's my number one suggestion here. There's one more that I'll give you, which is things happen, right? The last year is a great indication that unfortunately people come and go out of organizations. And so perhaps the relationship that you've built with this person, they're no longer at the organization. They might just be in a different role with the organization, and now they have different priorities, and that their priority wasn't to get back to you to tell you that they've moved on. So check for organizational changes there. There might be somebody else who took over the responsibilities and that just hasn't come to you. So maybe your deal isn't dead. You just need to reestablish a new champion. And then the last thing that I'll say is, if you're not getting good response from somebody that you're engaging with, come with a specific ask. And my suggestion here is a close the file type of ask. Hey, it looks like you haven't got back to me in a couple of days or weeks or whatever. We had a couple things on the agenda. We didn't get to them. Is this deal dead? Should I close the file? And oftentimes that will solicit a response. And I see, Mark, you're nodding. I'm sure you have many things to say on this subject.
Well, I think so. Specific ask is obviously a great one. I think just also generally like sometimes the deal isn't like as dead, but like I think like there are moments where it just stalls out in like a slows down sort of path. And I do think specificity of an ask is a great way, and a very short, sharp email is a great way to get a one-line email back, which is the kind of thing you want us to do just to start
Engagement.
going on there. I think the multi-threading piece, I know the multi-threading piece is a huge part for us. So multi-threading basically is just how many people do you have associated with the deal? We have in one of the tools that we use, like basically in our CRM, we have like this a warning that if a deal above a certain size has fewer than 4 people, like 4 contacts associated with it, it gets like a little warning symbol. And if it has fewer than 3, so if it has like, 2 or less, we kind of default view it as being like sort of at a meaningfully lower close rate than what we would normally sort of see. And so we'll see these deals that come in where we're like, people are like, oh, it's like, oh, great, and da da da. And I'm like, you only have 1 person on this deal. Like, this is like a meaningful risk to you. And if you have 4 people on there, even if they're not the 4 most perfect people in the whole org, but you've got a greater chance of building like 2 champions, or like 1 main champion and 1 sort of like secondary champion, etc., or a coach or whatever else, or like someone who has like, maybe your main champion is really great and has great influence with 1 person, but there's like a different person in the org that needs to be won over, and someone else kind of has the ear of that person. And it's a little bit of a numbers game. If 1 person gets fired, you're not sort of left out in the limb. So I would say like that's like the biggest like core part of the thing that has like changed how we sell, is to like actually have that tracked in the CRM to be like, hey, this doesn't have enough people on it for us to feel really confident about it. Of course, there are deals that go from go to woe with 1 person on it and it works perfectly and the exception proves the rule. But every time one of our sellers has the experience of like it going the other way, they're always like, I knew it. Like, why was I so silly and, going through on this side?
Yeah, we have a saying here at Mixmax is if this deal is important enough to your forecast, it's important enough to do all the things right.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter if it's a 7K deal, maybe your quota is only 30K and 7K is a big part of
Yeah.
that 30K. And so it's important enough to do all the things right.
There's a great question here, which is like, if you go to talk to others in the org, that could be viewed as going around the primary contact's back, right? And hurting the trust of that champion that you've sort of built there. So therefore, okay, listen to us jerks. You should multi-thread deals. Okay, well, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Like, what does that actually mean? Like, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts from the very beginning, right? No deal is decided by one individual person. And if that person is telling you, I'm the ultimate economic buyer, I think you need to be really suspicious of that. And there's a right way and a wrong way, right? The wrong way would be just to go around them without any introduction or relationship with these other people. But if you build a relationship with these people throughout the sales process, then you have the right and maybe the expectation to go to them to keep them informed of what's going on in the deal process. I know we're going way over on the time we've allotted for this specifically, but I love the conversation. So I'll give you an example. You start the evaluation with one person, and on the demo, they bring in two more people. After the demo's over, you follow up with those two people to make sure they got what they wanted from that demo, and you continue with the follow-up process with them individually on individual threads with them, not with everybody on the same thread, right? You want an individual relationship with those people so you can go back to them and ask them for information. You're not asking them to take over the deal cycle necessarily. You might just want information from them, right? You sort of go around to say, hey, how's it going from your perspective? What are the things that are top priorities for you? And then you have relationships with them individually.
100%. I'd even say, like, look, we're going to talk about this at the end. We're going to come back to the beginning, but like, I would say just a quick little one here, which is to say, like, when you start, like, sometimes when I'm watching a call recording of my team doing it, and you'll see one of your team members do this wonderfully, and they'll be having these like lovely discovery calls, and they're like, so I just want to understand, like, tell me about your process. How does that work today? Oh, interesting. Who runs that? Oh, Michelle. Oh, that's okay. Da 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 da. And like, oh, well, and so Michelle does one, and then so Bob does this. It's like, oh, okay, da da da. And then at the end, they're like, do you think when we do the demo next week that we should invite Michelle and Bob along? They don't have to say yes, but at least you've found out Michelle and Bob exist, and then they're kind of like, oh yeah, why not? We can. They might not turn up, but we can at least invite them. I can give you their emails, and I think there's sort of little tricks you can go on that side. All right, we've gone way too long here. We're going to roll on to the next one, which is pricing. Okay, so I think like one of the biggest things that you sort of have on this side is you've gone through a deal. This wonderful journey. You've got a great champion. Maybe it's even multi-threaded. You've got all these people going on. It's wonderful. It's great. And then you get to this issue of like the way this is priced is like not gonna work for us. Like what do you do there? And I think I'll kick off with a few tactics on my side, and then we'll sort of Kyle and I will share this back and forth a bit. I think there are a whole host of different tactics here that we'll talk about, but over the last couple of days, I've been thinking about this webinar and thinking what to say. I think like one of the biggest things is just that you need to reframe it. I think when pricing becomes an issue, it's often because someone internally has positioned it one way, and it's kind of gotten stuck in this thing of like price and value are sort of two sides of the same coin. And it's kind of gotten stuck in someone's mind as that's not valuable, that price is too high, that can't justify it. And you kind of need to like unblock that sort of internal decision. And I think the best sales reps don't reach for discount straight away. Now discount, listen, I have discounted deals. This is a shocking thing, I know, to admit publicly, but like, yeah, of course, there's been times where we've done discounts in different structures. I try to have a relatively firm hand on it because like I genuinely think that discounting like devalues your product, creates real problems in the sales org. There's a whole bunch of like ancillary things that fall off that. But I've definitely done it. But I think that like when you sort of look at that, I think the biggest thing is like, how do you reframe this? And so I think there's a few things that we sort of reach for a lot. One is, can you build an ROI case for them? So can you say like, hey, here are the challenges that we've heard from you. Here's your current system. We've built like a little sometimes even like a little spreadsheet model that explains your business, like sort of these core things to it. Here's how we think we're going to impact that. And here's like, if you make this, we think we can do this much, but even if you just assume we can do like a third as much of that, it's still going to have a very positive ROI for you, and sort of being able to sort of reframe and open up in a different way. I think a different way of reframing is to involve someone else on the call. So sometimes a seller and a champion, or a seller and a buyer, or whatever else, just sort of get to like a friction point around price where they've like, the buyer's like, this isn't worth it, and the seller's like, yes, it is. And like, there's kind of no movement there. And that can be a wonderful time to loop in someone else from the seller's org, kind of like me or a Kyle or someone sort of senior to that, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a sort of a sales leader, or the sort of, the CRO type or whatever. But again, that can just reframe it. You have a new face, a new tone, someone comes in and can sort of have a new conversation around it. It sort of allows it to sort of block off that sort of main price. I think the other thing is, when you do that, when you bring in someone else, and it doesn't have to be your boss necessarily, but it sort of can be, you also open this sort of the ability to like restart the conversation around it and be like, hey, guys, what really matters to you? Like let's sort of talk through this thing here. And one of the best things that you can do before you get to the dreaded discount is to understand, like, what are the things that you can give them for free that they really value that cost you nothing. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff here in some businesses you can have stuff where it's just like, do you know what? We have like, there are some like legal terms that really matter to you. Actually, we don't really care if we give that away. Maybe it's like a payment terms thing. It's like, hey, back in the land and the time, when money was free, a lot of startups like us would have like quite large balance sheets. And so if someone doesn't pay us for 90 days, I don't care. Like, I've just banked a $10 million funding round. Like, now there are other times where you're like, hey, I have no cash. I need cash in the door right now. It is really important for you to pay, 2 years up front on day dot. But like, there are times where you sort of be like, no, of course we can handle like flexible payment terms or whatever else. And there's a lot of things that you can sort of have wiggle room on that side. And I think that as you go through that sort of creative process, you sort of have this tendency towards like building rapport with the buyer. Like, I am putting in effort. I am trying to like find a creative solution here. I'm trying to sort of help us in the Venn diagram get to the overlap part where both of us feel pretty good about this deal, or equally bad about it. But like, that sort of awkward middle. And I think those are the main sort of things. I think when I sort of come into that, a big thing for me is the reframe. What do you think, Carl?
Yeah, I love what you're saying. There's a bunch of things, especially around price. And actually, Hannah just asked a question, which I was going to respond to yours, but now I'm going to respond to her, which is the sticker shock of the initial price proposal when you give them pricing. I have a great answer for that, which is, you need to understand the impact of your solution on their business before you deliver pricing. Because if you deliver a $10 million solution to $1 million problem, guess what? They're going to laugh in your face. But if it's the opposite, if you deliver $1 million solution to a $10 million problem, they're going to love that, right? So you need to quantify the impact that this pain or problem has in their organization first before you deliver price. And you need to know that that is going to resonate with them. And if it won't, then you should probably disqualify that deal. If the pain is only equal to, $10,000 worth of challenges in their organization, and you're going to present a solution above that, don't even do it, and tell them honestly, right? I think our solution is overpriced for what the problem that you were trying to solve. And hopefully there's a way you can pare that down to find some common ground there, but maybe not. And that's all about qualification up front, right? So you qualify the deal to understand what it is and to see if it's a deal that you should pursue before you present price. Sorry, I got off on that tangent, but
no, I love it.
I'm huge on quantification.
I also love something that Andrew said here, which is, he sort of had this line about cut deliverables until it's the minimal viable solution for the client. I will say that we've had times where we've kind of gone through a deal and been like, hey, we both know that this, like, here is like the minimum possible starting point. Like, it's less features, it's less seats, but like, do you know what? We can go in here and prove this out. And it does become a land and expand motion. And yes, guess what? The seller's job isn't done. It's actually like you've done you've gotten to base camp and now you need to go the rest. But I think that actually can be a very valuable part to go through, especially when you stand by your product and service and you know that you're going to give an excellent experience to them. And I think that that can be a good way to like have that in your back pocket. As again, I wouldn't do that as the first option.
Yeah.
But I would have that again before you get to like the dreaded discounting, which again, there's a time and place, and that's all fine. But like, I think that's a nice way of also sort of, again, it's like a reframe of like, what's the minimum thing we both know that this could be a valuable partnership. Like, what's the minimal way we can start together to sort of remove all the friction there? And that can be another good tool.
Yeah,
Okay.
product-led growth is a super sexy term right now. And if you're lucky enough to have product upsell opportunities within the product itself, you can sell a minimum viable solution to them. And then the product being good at what it does and having features that are grayed out or not available to them that they can grow into and upsell themselves. I mean, that can absolutely work. I think you're better off selling the value of the entire solution first and then going to this if this becomes a real challenge. However, this absolutely can work. And I think Mark said it nicely.
Gang, there are a bunch of absolutely fantastic questions on pricing. We're gonna save them up and we're gonna loop back around towards the end. So feel free to re-ask them, or Jess and Brendan in the background might sort of keep those ones saved up. Kyle, mate, I really want to do this deal with you, but this has just been deprioritized within our org. I'm just sorry, man. It's just like it's not our number one priority anymore. We really have to apparently deal with a natural disaster or something. I'm not sure here, but no, but there's something else going on. What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, you would be lucky to hear this from them. Actually, I think what oftentimes happens when deals stall, especially when you've gotten to a certain stage in the process, is buyers are afraid to tell you the truth, right? They don't want conflict. That some buyers are jerks and be like, go kick rocks. But a lot of people, especially if you built a relationship with them, they want to hide these types of things from you, and so they're afraid to tell you. So you'd be lucky to know that it's deprioritized, because then you can actually do something about it. And so that's number one. Number two is I will tell salespeople to be unselfish. That's so hard to do as a salesperson, but you need to put yourself in the other person's shoes and think about, they've got a job to do. Buying software is generally not their only job, right? They evaluate software because it's going to help them in doing their job, but you need to think about the things that they are concerned with and what their priorities are. And so sometimes those priorities change and they've got to go do something else. There's a myriad of examples of this. There's a couple different types of these, actually. Maybe the CFO changes the priorities for the people below them and says, look, you're not focused on this anymore. We need you focused on this. Or the CEO or the CRO or somebody. And then there might be organizational changes, or a problem that comes up in the organization, right? They're trying to buy Qwilr, and all of a sudden they have this database fiasco where they lose a bunch of data, and then they've got to reassign all of their resources to go fix this other thing, and then buying Qwilr becomes less of a priority for them. This happens. So I've just said all these things to say this happens. What you do when this happens is you try to really, you can't change their priorities for them. Yes, you can do some certain things to make sure that this remains a priority for them in the longer term. But I think the best thing here is empathy and sympathy and understanding that things do change, and then trying to understand what the real timeline should be when they want to come back to this. And so that is what will keep you with a strong relationship with this prospect, is not pushing too hard, not being a pushy salesperson, not being prototypical, and trying to shove something down their throat. And so that's my advice there. I will say that early on in the sales cycle, I've already talked about quantification. I will say quantification helps a lot here. If you quantify this with them and you say, look, this problem sounds like it's costing you $1 million a year. I understand it's become deprioritized. I'm just going to say it's $1.2 million a year because I'm bad at math and this is easier. This is costing you $1.2 million a year. That's $100,000 a month. Yeah, you want to push it back 3 months, but knowing that it's $300,000 that you're costing the organization by doing that. Just as a reminder, I'm not saying you have to do it. I just wanted to say we did this together. You agreed that this was a $1.2 million problem and it's $100,000 a month. I want to get this done for you just like you want to get it done for the organization. those certain things can help, but they can't come from you. It can't be an ROI that I put together by myself. It needs to be an ROI, a quantification, whatever you want to call it, that we agreed on together, and the customer, the prospect, has really bought into it and owned it.
I've got to say on our side, like so just agree with 100% of that. I think like there's a way to have these conversations when things are deprioritized. Obviously, everyone is going to naturally attempt to sort of re-engage and get it reprioritized and whatever else. I think the thing that you sort of often have to realize is, again, you're right. You are lucky that you're sort of hearing that, and deprioritize doesn't mean you're dead, right? I think
Yeah.
how you handle that situation, there is definitely a way that you can handle that where you kill the deal yourself by burning the bridge, burning trust, and all that sort of stuff there. And I think that there's also a way that you can actually, maybe it's going to push out, not going to close this quarter, but at some stage next quarter or the quarter after, it comes back bigger and better than ever. That there's one that we're going through like right now. It's about, he says, classic salesperson, about to close. We'll see. But I think it's about to close. Where we have one where a company got acquired, and during an acquisition, no one's like buying software there, right? Everyone's trying to lock in, let's not add any costs or remove costs. We've kind of agreed to this thing. Let's close the deal, merge the companies, and then reevaluate. And that deal is now back on the table, like having been handled really wonderfully by our rep, who were just like, oh, I totally get it. Is there anything I can do to be helpful? Like, they had, in a previous experience before Qwilr, been acquired, and they sort of had a bit of a chat about that and how that was. And now that deal's returned with the original sales team and the acquirer's sales team. And so it's like a 2x bigger deal that I think is like sort of really well sort of set up here. So I think, again, being empathetic, understanding, and I think like on that sort of side there, obviously, look, if you can turn it around, and I think, as Carl said, there are a bunch of things you can do to attempt to turn around in the moment. But I would say also that if you're hearing from them, like, it's a pretty high trust moment to say to the person, hey, like, I'm really sorry, but this just isn't the priority inside the org right now. But that's actually them being pretty vulnerable with you and being like pretty honest with you. And you shouldn't think of that as being a slap in the face. You should actually think of that as being them being like actually quite respectful to your relationship. And I think if you treat them with respect in return, there's actually like that can be quite powerful. And you never know, right? That person might leave the org and go to a different org and sort of, choose your product then. Okay. We're past the half-hour mark. We've got to keep cracking along here. The next topic we want to talk about a little bit is the invisible buyer. And so well, actually, before I dive into this deeply, in your mind, mate, I mean, you talked about the CFO earlier, but like, who exists in that land of the invisible buyer for you?
I mean, it could be the invisible buyer. It could be, I think somebody mentioned this already in the chat, actually. It could be the invisible naysayer, right? Somebody who's not actually involved in the active evaluation process, so you haven't met them, but behind the scenes, they're trying to harpoon your deal, right?
Yeah.
These are real things that happen inside of organizations for whatever reason. Maybe they have a bad impression of your brand, of your product. Maybe they were the ones who chose the incumbent that you are now replacing, and they're not on the evaluation team anymore. And so it's a slap in the face for them, or a black mark on them for choosing the incumbent that's now being replaced. There's all sorts of things that could happen. There are people who might be in competition for the budget and who want to say no, right? Your solution is quite expensive, and so it's going to take budget away from a pool of money that they want to draw from. So all these things can happen. And I mean, I'm sure you'll get to this when you talk about this, Mark, because you're taking the lead on this, but to build a champion who can sell when you are not in the room is the gold standard, right? That's what you need to do, because there's going to be naysayers. There's going to be people who say no, and you need to empower and embolden your champion to be able to sell maybe not just as well, but fairly well on your behalf when you're not in the room. Sorry, I just stole your thunder.
No, that's great, man. I think I read a really wonderful piece recently, which was talking about it was written by like a product manager who used to be an engineer, And I think the title of the post was like, these are the people who sell your product, or who like, I don't know. And it was just talking about like how he had quite a negative view of sales, and then like actually come to appreciate like what a salesperson does. And one of the things he talked about is like, a good salesperson isn't just like, selling shiny things and look over here. It's like partially it's like shepherding a deal through an organization. Like a modern seller is like in a larger buying org, for the big deals that we all get wonderfully excited about. Again, Kyle and I, disclaimer, we work in tech. So like, this is a little bit tech focused, but in tech right now, invisible buyers you might see are like security team being like, hey, like, is this past muster for our various, security requirements? The IT team generally being like, hey, like, is this going to work with our various IT situations? The finance team and the CFO, like, is this in budget? Plus you need to like actually win the team you're trying to win themselves. Sometimes in some orgs, you also kind of need to win like the founder, business owner, partner, CEO, insert senior exec on this journey. And I think that like understanding who those are and having knowledge of how that typically works, and how to take that your champion on that journey. Now, sometimes the champion comes in and they are the ultimate economic buyer and they don't need anyone's approval and they've got the credit card ready to go. But a lot of the time they don't, and they're really keen on your product, but sometimes they don't even know how their own process internally works. Like they'll get hit with procurement and they'll be like, what the hell is procurement?
Yeah.
And, I think that there can be sort of flows in that side where like the salesperson does need to be a shepherd here. And so how do you go through and try to understand for them, like, again, as we sort of, soon we're going to go back to the beginning and talk about the early stages of a deal and how you can set yourself up for success. But I think there is a huge part here of like uncovering with your champion the blockers that could exist in the deal, knowing the various things that could come up, and being ready to handle them and ready to sort of shepherd them through that deal. I think the other side here is as you work with your champion to build a case for like why it should be adopted, you want to give them the resources to be able to like share internally the pieces that can sort of help win this on this. Shameless plug, but obviously Qwilr does a bunch of this stuff with our product. Like when you make a Qwilr page, it's a live web page. You can send a proposal initially, but it's a website, right? You can update it with different things. And we see people using it. We've got an ROI tool inside there that you can sort of have embedded. We also see people doing stuff where they have like a call recording, be it in Chorus or Gong or whatever. Now, like embed that call recording of the demo inside the Qwilr page so that, new people who come onto the deal can be like, wait, what is this? What's going on? And they can sort of see different stuff there. You can also have like in your pricing section, you can have like pricing options. So it's like, hey, pricing package A, cheaper, but less stuff. Pricing package B, has all the ROI, blah, blah, a bit more. And so you can do sort of things to sort of say, hey, I'm going to allow you to have the tools to help sell to the invisible buyer so they can sort of go and understand like what their various parts are there. I haven't touched on legal. Obviously, legal can be like like something in that process of blocking the deal as well. But I think like all of these things are trying to understand like, hey, how's this going to work, and helping your champion navigate that is like another thing of like a high trust seller can sort of build and go through on that side. I think the other side here is also just to be like, when you see an invisible buyer blocking the sale, the best outcome is to have a conversation with that blocker, and that can be quite hard to do. A tactic that we use at Qwilr, I'm sure there are better ones, but is again just to loop me in, right? Or to loop someone else senior in, and to sort of say like, hey, would you be able to get your CFO on a call with my CFO or my CEO or my head of sales or my and sort of the champion, both parties get to bring a senior to the table, and that the two seniors can talk it through. This isn't because senior people are amazing and can do amazing things. It's just because it helps to reframe the conversation and bring in fresh blood and allow there to be that sort of, hey, let's take a breath. What are you trying to do? We understand this. We're sort of here. How can we work together on that side? Anything else you sort of want to throw in the mix here, mate?
Before I do, somebody asked a question about what is an invisible buyer, and just very quickly, the definition would be somebody that you don't know is involved in the process or you don't get to speak to directly. right? They may actually be involved in the process, but your buyer, your champion, your coach, your evaluation team doesn't know it, and they're working behind the scenes and they're transparent to you. That's why we call it invisible, right? You don't know that that's happening. I think you said something really critical, Mark, and we'll talk about this when we go at the end back to the beginning, which is oftentimes the buyer doesn't know their own process. And so asking that question, have you ever bought software like this before? Just a very pointed question. And if they say yes, great. What was the process like when you did it? What were the things that you learned that that we can use in this process? What are the things that are still questions to you? I will say this, I don't suggest anybody on this call go in and say that they know the process of buying better than their prospects. Absolutely don't do that. But what I am about to say is that you sell every single day. And so you can kind of guide them and shepherd them through this process. And you can ask questions about what you have seen in the dozens, if not hundreds, or even thousands of deals that you've worked in the past. And so things like, do you have a legal process? Do you have a security process? Do you have an IT process? Do you governance, all these things? Ask those questions. And oftentimes what you'll find is buyers don't know. And so this is how you build a joint execution plan or a mutual action plan or whatever you want to call them. I highly recommend those. We could do another hour-long webinar just on mutual action plans. But this is how you build that plan with them, because you know that they need to go find out these things and they need to go get approval on these things. And that is a huge qualification criteria if they're willing to go find out these things that are huge buying signals. You usually don't send a deal through legal and through security unless you plan to buy it. You're not going to waste those teams' times.
Yeah.
So that's a huge qualification criteria and a big buying signal.
All right. We are about to go back to the beginning and talk about the glorious topic of prevention is better than the cure. And I am just thrilled to like throw that softball to Kyle. But before we do that, are there any other like sort of stalled deal scenarios that you guys see regularly that we haven't talked about yet? Again, we're going to talk about prevention is better than the cure. But if there's anything else that you really want us to dive into, now is the time. Throw it in the chat or throw it in the Q&A, and we'll try to do our best when we sort of finish this next little section to jump into Q&A and try to be very relevant on that side if we can. Okay, Kyle, let's go back to the beginning. When we say prevention is better than the cure, what do we mean by that?
Do it right up front. Be aware that these things are potential landmines in the sales process and get ahead of them, right? I will say that a deal, the most important part of the sales process is discovery, right? It's your opportunity to find out about the prospect and about the situation and about their pain and about ideal outcomes and about other competing priorities, all these things. This is your opportunity to ask a ton of questions. If you do 15 minutes of discovery and believe that that is enough for your deal, I'm going to tell you that's not enough. This is your opportunity to ask all these questions up front. And yes, there is some nuance here. I'm not going to say start asking buying questions like, who's your legal officer that's going to sign off on the deal in the first 15 minutes of the call? Don't do that. But there is an opportunity for you to find out how they generally evaluate software. That's a great discovery question. How have you evaluated software in the past? And that can go on and on and on and on. You can take that, you can pull that thread all the way through to the very end when contract is signed. And so to do the proper things up front and to make sure that you're asking those questions and really developing and building that relationship and the rapport that then allows you to ask those more difficult pointed questions. I just can't say enough about discovery and quantification and making sure that you really understand if this deal is a good deal for them and makes sense for their business and their situation.
So I think when we sort of go, I suppose like, I think there's one thing here, and I am keen for you to actually tee off a little bit on MAP and JEP and other things like that. I think like one thing that I would say is that one of the great things about being a seller, as you said this before, is that you see a lot of the same pitches, right? You see a lot of the same sort of scenario again and again and again. And I think one of the most important things is to understand like where you are in that process, like what you're sort of facing here. And I think as you go through discovery on this sort of side of things, like it's okay to go through that question. And it's kind of essential in a seller. Like all of the best sellers do this consistently. They qualify out more deals than you would expect. They go through and they say, hey, actually, having spoken to you for half an hour this morning, I don't think this is a great fit for you in the current situation because XYZ. And if you disagree with me, I'm obviously very happy to keep this process going. But I do think that because of these issues, I don't think this feels like it will be a great fit for your company or for you at this time. And you would be amazed at how often this gets done. Like it's you feel like, oh, it's going to happen like 1 in 100 times. No, the best sellers do this like consistently quite highly. And the amazing thing is that in a decent chunk of them, like a lot of the time, like the majority of the time, the customer's like, you're right, this isn't a fit for me. Thank you for saying that up front. You've built more trust with me. I'm going to recommend your company to other people, blah, blah, blah. There's sort of good vibes on that thing. But some chunk of the time, the customer comes back and says, you know, I understand what you're saying, but I actually think we can address those things. And actually, I think because of these reasons, this is why it makes sense. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I think like they end up being more bought in because of that. And I would say that like understanding and being comfortable to be like, hey, there's going to be another customer that I can speak to, and having the confidence on that side, and also having the confidence like I've been able to sell this before, I'm going to be able to sell it again. I think is like that can play a really important part in this sort of starting phase of just being sure that you're speaking to the right person. That being said, let's imagine we're not qualifying them out of this situation. We've gone through decent disco. We've sort of understood a bit about them. Like, how can like a joint execution plan or a mutual action plan like make sense in the moment when you're sort of, and how can you sort of start building that from the start?
Yeah. I think the most important words in each one of those, I don't care what you call it, joint execution plan, mutual action plan, the most important word is joint and mutual. It's not you build the plan for them and you say, this is what we should do. You build it together. They need to be bought in, otherwise it's not going to work, right? These are the things that you've understood throughout the process, right? A mentor of mine said, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And so if you don't understand what you're going to be pitching to them, what you're going to be telling them that they should buy because it fits into their problem, their pain, their issue, their company, their situation, then you're just pitching, right? You're just throwing stuff out there. And the worst thing you can do is take them through discovery and then give them some vanilla pitch, right? They will feel like you wasted their time. And so I highly recommend a customized approach where you use their language, you use their vernacular, you use their situation, and you come back, you use specific numbers that they've given you, all these things. That's how you really build that trusted advisor status with them. And that's how they feel like you have also their best interest in mind when you're trying to sell them a solution, because it fits with exactly what they need it to do. The mutual action plan is not a one-time thing. You start building it, you don't actually like deliver it to them in the discovery call, but in your head, you start building it in the discovery phase. You're doing the things up front where you can build this plan that will take you all the way through to completion of the deal. And I'll also suggest one thing just while we're talking about joint execution plans or mutual action plans. Don't end it at contract sign date. That's a very salesy, selfish thing to do. End it at successful rollout, implementation, value, whatever, through customer success. If you just build it to sign date, it's going to look like you're going to step away from the deal and never talk to them again afterwards. And that's not a good feeling for the buyer.
Yeah. I think like one of the sort of big things here is I can't stress this enough. Like the first call you have with a buyer, and maybe it goes over 2 calls, but like sort of they really are like, it's so critical. Like it's a very, very important time to understand them, their problems, their needs. Obviously, you need to flip it around and start answering their questions about like how you might be able to help them. You can't just have an entire call be discovery. I mean, you can, but like I think like understanding what you're trying to do through the process and having a little checklist of things which we literally have a checklist in Qwilr of things that the sales rep would like to get to on that call. And they know that they can't, if they're running out of time, that they won't be able to do all of them. And they need to flip into like, hey, let me show you more about Qwilr. Let me tell you some things. Let me try to answer some of your questions. But like understanding what an ideal situation would be to try to sort of get out things here, whether it's about multi-threading we talked about earlier, whether it's about like qualification, whether it's about like uncovering those potential future blockers, what does the buying process look like? Understanding what your goals are for later, and then being clear with your sales team about, hey, if we can discover these 5 or 6 things on the first call, or at least a good chunk of them, we're gonna have a much better chance for success later. Okay, we're nearing the end here. We've only got 9 minutes to go. We're gonna quickly, Jess, do you want to sort of share the screen here before we get into Q&A? We're about to jump into Q&A very quickly. We've got a couple of offers here today. If you would like a free proposal upgrade, so if you've got a pitch deck or a presentation or proposal that you'd love to see what it would look like in Qwilr, you can see this. There's a wonderful QR code here. Get out your phones, scan the code. We usually charge about $100 for these, but this is free for everyone on this call today. We'd love to be able to quickly show you, hey, here's what Qwilr can look like for your org, and no obligation. You can just, whatever, share it around, share it to all your invisible buyers, and we can sort of go from there. And the glorious Mixmax.
Yeah, so we would love to show you the power of Mixmax. Mixmax does a bunch of things that we've talked about here. You can see buyer engagement, track email opens, share calendars so that you're moving your deal along. There's a bunch of automation and stuff that specifically we have talked about here to keep engagement throughout. And so if you're interested in learning more about Mixmax, again, no obligation. We'd love to talk with you and tell you what Mixmax can do for your organization, really understand your challenges and needs first, obviously, as we're talking about discovery.
100% strong endorse of Mixmax. And I think again, we'll send out an email after this with the call recording and these offers in there and blah. Okay, let's get to questions. So if you've had a question you've asked in the chat that you would love us to get into, feel free to drop it into the Q&A, which is wonderfully, I think, empty so far. So feel free to drop in the Q&A. So there have been, so there's one here, which is,
we were on Disco.
Here we go. Hold on. I've got one here. Would you share any techniques using Qwilr to revive a deal with a potential client? Okay. And that's from Jerry, I think. So I think the thing that Qwilr does very well here is it gives you a space. It's a web page that you can sort of work with together. It gives you a space to do a few things. So one, you can build your mutual action plan or joint execution plan quite nicely in Qwilr. It also can be a space where you have, because you can sort of have, it's this one web page, you can obviously link out to other web pages, you can fold sections in, you can embed video or whatever else. It gives you a space to address a bunch of different concerns within an org so that your champion can be like, hey, the legal people are going to care about the legal terms, like that's embedded in the Qwilr. The finance people are going to care about the pricing and the ROI. Again, they can have a section dedicated to that. You can also have sections where it's like, hey, there are people on my team who are actually going to be the users of this product. Are they going to get bought into this? And you can embed the demo or embed some more information or links to how the product works or whatever is sort of useful on that side. Embedding the demo call really can be wonderful because, again, you're literally showing them, often with a doc that's been converted into a Qwilr page from one of their existing bits of collateral. It's very easy to grok, oh, okay, I can see how this would work and how this would be part of my workflow, etc. So I think all of those things are just things that build that good health throughout the sort of the process. As far as using the Qwilr deal for a stalled deal, there is one thing that we do, which is if we lose a prospect who sort of vanishes sort of on us and we sort of don't hear back, at a certain point, you're allowed to reach out to other people in the org, right? You can sort of, all of a sudden the AE can act like an SDR and start to be like, who else in this org should I sort of chat to? And it's okay to sort of reach out to them and be like, hey, by the by, we were talking with so-and-so recently, they seem to have left your company or they seem to have been promoted to a different role or something else here. We were working on a joint plan together that sort of looked like this. It might be a very slimmed down version of that. And we've actually had decent amounts of success, people being like, oh, actually, that is interesting. Who you should speak to is Jessica or, Rob or whoever. And so I think that you can sometimes use that on that side. But again, all of these things are sort of like you're doing much better if you've set yourself up for success in that early phase and then sort of built that sort of trust together. There was a good question earlier, which I'm going to quickly fly into, which I'm going to throw to you, Kyle. Someone sort of said, we didn't really deal with competitors here. So if a deal is sort of like stalling because of a competitor, and I think like if I think about what a competitor might be doing, they might be spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt about your product and being like, hey, I've found the collection of 1-star reviews for this company and sent them to you in an email of like, because every company who has, whatever, hundreds and hundreds of reviews, you're going to have 1 or 2 where you've unfortunately not lived up to expectations. And I think like, so there can be things like that. There can also be stuff where they sort of say, oh, well, they can frame it as, oh, well, their product doesn't do this and ours does this or whatever else. How do you think about that when you think a competitor is sort of the real issue stalling a deal?
Yeah. First of all, I would say never underestimate the fact that they're going to evaluate other solutions, right? Expect that. Don't encourage them to do it. Don't invite them to do it. Don't send them a list of people to go to evaluate. But expect that they're going to do that and expect that these other solutions are going to have things that you may not have or do things differently. Maybe they're cheaper. Maybe their implementation is easier, all sorts of different things. Also, one quick side note here, never disparage a competitor. Never say, oh, they're garbage or anything like that. It's just dirty pool and it makes you look like you're scared of them or something else. Take the high road, saying, look, they're a great competitor. I'm sure that lots of their customers are very happy with their solution. Our solution feels like it is custom fit for your problem, though, right? And that's where you build that case. And so really going back to how your solution is going to specifically satisfy their needs and relieve their pain. There's all sorts of situations, like a competitor may come in late into the game, right? You're 80% of the way through the sales process. And you want to talk about invisible buyer. The CFO may say, who else did you evaluate? Nobody. Okay, go evaluate 2 more vendors and then come back to me, right? This can happen. That's a stalled deal right there. So I'm not saying go ask them to evaluate other solutions, but know if they are and know if they're not. And both of those are risk factors and you got to deal with both of them. So I would say focus on the core, focus on your product and what you can do for them. And not often, I should say, very often the best salesperson wins, not necessarily the best product wins. And so if you do all the things right in the sales process, you can win that deal even if there's a better product out there.
I also would say here that like, I'm going to butcher this line. Is the line a best defense is a good offense or something like this? Like there's sometimes like there's something I think sometimes you do need to realize that you're going to get compared to competitors. And I think when you speak about your product, it is always worthwhile to keep in mind, like and especially if you've done this for a while, like if you have a sales rep who's been with you for, whatever, more than a year or 2, they'll know who the competitors are and they'll sort of see someone come in. They'll be like, oh, I bet they're comparing us against so-and-so. Well, I know so-and-so does X and we do Y and we think Y is the better path for these reasons. And, they'll just start, as they start talking about the product, they'll start a little bit leaning into the direction of like, hey, we think the most important way for this to work is X, Y, Z because you get this value out of it. And if they get bought into that, you've kind of slightly depositioned the other competing solution or service or tool kind of before they've even started. They might never get to it, but it can also be just a useful way of just knowing where your strengths lie versus your competitors. And just sort of, again, talking to that. It might be the case that, again, it might be the case that there is a company I know who has I don't think they have the best product, but they know that they have by far the best sales process, the best customer success, the best support, etc. And so they just talk about how excellent it is to have really good people who help you along the way, who handhold you through the whole process. And like customers care about that. And like, I think again, like they can sort of lean into that sort of side and sort of reposition things. Okay, we're at time here. I think maybe we've got one last one. So Jeannie has asked a tough one. So you were selling one thing, but they come back with a totally different thing. I think, yeah. My first thing here is, have I qualified them correctly? And then am I just going to qualify them out and just say, oh, okay, like, sorry, that's not what we do, and come back on that side? I think sometimes in that situation, you can have someone new come into the process, and or they've had someone above them say, hey, actually what we need is this, and they come back in there. And sometimes when I have something like that where I'm like slightly confused as to what's going on, I just take a breath and restart and say, hey, let's go back to the start here. So what I had understood was A, B, C, D. Is that like, am I still correct to have understood that? And then maybe like, oh, actually B is not correct anymore. And you're like, oh, okay. And so then you sort of talk through, explain to me that and da. Because when there is like a misunderstanding, like a meaningful misunderstanding between buyer and seller as to what's going on here, you just need to empathetically get to the bottom of like what that is and why that is, so that you can sort of try to find out there. I don't know. What do you think, Carl?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly where priorities change. And it sounds like their evaluation criteria changed. And ideally, their problem didn't go away. They're just looking for maybe a slightly different solution to it, right? That's why discovery is so important, to really understand their pain and what in like the problem that they're trying to solve. And if that remains the same, then maybe your product isn't a fit because they've changed the priority of it, or they've changed the scope of it, or something like that. So yeah, I would say discovery, coming back to discovery. There's one other question about discovery I want to cover in like 10 seconds. Christopher Lee asked a question. My customers want to get to the product really, really quickly, and so I don't have time for discovery. You need to flip that back on them and tell them why discovery is important for both of you, right? I could demo Mixmax for 2.5 hours. You might not get what you want in that 2.5 hours. We're a big, broad product. And so what I want to do is I want to ask you some pointed questions about what you're interested in seeing so that I can craft a specific demo for your problem. So it's good for you to invest this time with me so that you get back exactly what you want. If you just want to go look at the product, we could waste our time and spin our wheels on a bunch of stuff, and I would never know, and you would never know, and you would get frustrated, I would get frustrated. So let's spend this time together to make sure that it's a good use of our time in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always just kick this off with like, why are we here today? You could be doing anything else in the world with your time right now, but you are on a sales call with me. Why? Like, what are you hoping to achieve? And then that just leads into a number of sort of, and I think it tries to get to the core of their thing, and then sort of there's a number of questions that sort of flow on from there. And sometimes people do say like, hey, like, can we just get into the demo of this product, please? And you're allowed to pause and be like, sure, we can. Like, what are the top 3 things you want me to demo? And again, like, that's kind of, you're not like, I will then go and demo those things to them. But like, as I'm demoing them to them, I'll be like, hey, so why are you interested in this thing? Or like, what are you trying to achieve here? Oh, okay, because I can show you different. And I think that's sort of part of it, is you can keep the disco going during a demo. Obviously you need to be like super comfortable with the demo. Team, we've run long. I'm very sorry. Bad time management on my behalf. Slap on the wrist. Lovely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for all the questions. There's a bunch of questions here that we didn't get to. There's a few of them that are Qwilr related. I will try to reply to those people directly, or our team will get back to you on that sort of side. Similar thing with Mixmax. I'm sure Carl's team will get in touch. Otherwise, go and check out Mixmax. Wonderful product. Come check out Qwilr. Wonderful product. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day, lovers, for all those in America. Hope you have a great day, Kyle. And thank you so much, everybody. It was wonderful to see you all.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody.